Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to automate parameters inside of PhasePlant and to make your track have a bit more movement. This is a good trick for making a track feel like it has more personality and also like it has some more progression. So if we listen to what we left off with last time, this is what we have. So overall, this is sounding okay, but it could definitely use some more movement and just some more creative transitions, etc. So just to get the basics down, we're going to load a PhasePlant up and show you how to add macros. If I have an analog oscillator here with an envelope, what I can do is I can put a macro here and automate any value. And once I've dragged this value up or down, when I drag the macro, it's going to affect this. So as you see, this is the 0 point. And then when I go to 100, it's all the way up here. Now this can work in inverse. So for example, if I drag this macro to be minus, if I go up now, it's going to drag it down. You can also automate a lot of things with one macro. For example, I could automate the harmonic here. I could also automate the attack value or even the curve. So as you can see, when I drag this macro, it's going to automate all these values. And you can do each individual one to a different degree. So if you right click, you can also enter in a specific amount. So you could go, in decimal points as well. And this can really help you with making controls that are really tailored to what you need in your specific song. So if we go back to the original bass that we made in the first tutorial, as you can see, we have some macros that we've set up here. So this is the wavetable position. This will change where this position starts on this wavetable. We have the LFO rate, which changes the rate of the LFO. We have the LFO volume amount, which is the amount that it's making it pulse. And then we have the LFO delay amount, which if you remember from the first tutorial, is this envelope here, which was, it changes the rate of the LFO. As you can see, if you hover over, it tells you what is being automated. So this just changes how much of this is being affected. So the attack, it changes the attack time basically. Now, one extra macro I added was this knob here that says even slower, because the LFO rate only goes down to a certain amount. And this is because even though this looks very slow, this is 0.10 hertz, when you press the key, the envelope is going to go and end here, which means that the LFO is actually going to be very fast at the end because this envelope is automating the rate. So if we have a listen now, you can see how fast that LFO is going. So if I show you how I did this macro, I made a macro here. If I start it at 0 and automate this value here, then what I did is, for example, if I then move the knob, it's not going to do anything. You see it's not controlling this actual thing. It's because the default position of this is 100. You can't go higher than this. So if I push it up 100, it's trying to go up to 200, but it can't do that. So if I set the 0 position here when it's at 0, and then now when I go up, it's going to actually go up to 100. You got to bear that in mind when you're trying to automate things, is that, for example, if you're going up by 100, it's going to try to go past that. So that's all I did to make that. So now if I automate this or change the value, you can hear how the LFO is actually going to be slow now. But that's a bit too slow. So this is just going to be an extra layer of control for the bass. This can be a really useful trick to editing presets or even basses that you've made and you want to add a different kind of spin on it in a project that you're using it for. For example, if the LFO is too fast, if, for example, you're using a phase oscillation bass like the Noise to Meet You bass that we've made in another tutorial, which is that the wobble is determined by the detune between the two oscillators. So you can set up a macro that changes the detune level between those two, and that's how you can change the rate of that. Or for example, you could have an automation to bring the distortion down if you don't want to actually change the default patch, or if you want to automate it during the song. Reverb is also a very good thing to automate. You can add some creative effects with some reverb automation. There's lots of things you can do. If we look at the automation we've got going on here with this PhasePlant patch, you can see that I'm automating two values. So the first value we're automating is macro 2, which is just LFO rate, and then macro 5, which is this one, the even slower. So if you listen to the differences here, if I turn them off on this part, and then if I automate them, you can see that the LFO is slowed down so that it's in time, and it's just the pattern that I felt was resonating most in this song here. And if we listen to the second part as well, if I disable the automations, so I wanted a bit of a slower automation at the start, so I brought down the even slower automation here. And then on this one, I've added a bit of a curve going up as well. Then what I've done is I've added a send reverb here. So all it is a medium gated verb with a EQ cutting out the low end. and then that's sending in here. So then I've automated the send here, as you can see, to ramp up. And then obviously the send cuts out when the next bar starts. So if we have a quick listen to that. So you could even then automate the release as well to cut out, for example, on the new bar so that you completely cut things out. And reverb automation like that can really help you kind of shape a track and make it sound like it's breathing and moving. Next up, we have the noise to meet you patch. There wasn't much I automated on this, so I've automated macro 5 and 6, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the pitch envelope, and macro 6, which is a new one that I made. And all this is doing is automating the attack. So basically these two macros are just automating how thumpy the bass is sounding, because the pitch envelope and the actual volume envelope are controlling that. So if you see on these notes here, you can see that I've automated the pitch envelope and the volume envelope to be slower on the volume envelope and the pitch envelope to not be as aggressive. So if you listen to the difference of the phrase here, with and without, so without them, listen to the start of the notes that are being highlighted here. So this second one here and this one here. But then with the automation on, listen to how it softens up some of the notes. And that just kind of helps you with the flow of the bass along with the drums. For example, if we listen without this soloed. So without these automations, and then with. This little change just allowed it to have a bit more of a push and pull feeling rather than just sounding like it's constantly kind of punching. If we move on to the rubber ring sound here, and we solo this, this is what it sounds like without any of the automations. So the first thing I automated was macro 3. So macro 3 is the detune. So as the sound goes along, it starts to detune more and more. This just adds a bit more kind of creative flair to it. Macro 4, which is the reverb. I have it reverbed a bit less at the start here than it is on the default patch, and then it comes down to barely being like reverbed at all. So as the detune goes up, the reverb comes down because the detune is going to make a sound messier anyway, and the reverb is going to do that as well. So I don't want it to sound too messy by having a reverb on top of the detune. So one or the other for me. Then we've got the mod wheel. So a lot of patches will have different kind of things attached to the mod wheel. Usually you'll have something like a vibrato, or it will open up a filter or something, but it's going to depend from patch to patch. So just play with the mod wheel and see what it does. So for example, on this one, if I start playing with the mod wheel, you can hear it's starting to do something with the pitch. So with the automation on the sequencer here, this is what happens. It just adds another layer of changing in the sound, so it doesn't sound like it's just the same note over and over again. This is how you can get something to sound like it's moving, even though you're not changing the note technically, or you're not really changing the sequence a lot of the time, but it can still sound like it's doing something interesting. Then on top of that, I've added another reverb automation. So I've got a send effect here. This is just a room reverb, and I've got a send automation here, as you can see. This is what it sounds like with that on top, which then tails out after, which you could also obviously automate the return as well to cut that off, so it would just sound more like this, which sounds cool in its own right. So with those automations on the sound on top of the mix, this is what it sounds like. So without that, this is what it sounds like as well. With, without. Just makes the sound progress a bit more and just a bit more interesting to listen to. And now with this last layer here, if we go through slowly and add in all these automations, so we already have all the insert effects, this is what it sounds like. So with this sound, I didn't really automate any of the macros from inside PhasePlant, but I automated some of the parameters of the external effects rather than the ones inside of PhasePlant, because I felt like I wanted some more movement on top of what I was already getting inside the synth. So I have the halftime, which is just that octaver sound. So if we listen to with that on the automation, adds in that tone underneath. And I've got a Valhalla room, which is just going to start making it roomy as it goes along. And then on top of that, because I've got a room reverb, I wanted to put a trance gate to then chop the sound on top of the room reverb. But I'm dry wet mixing this in here, so that it's not just completely 100%. Because if it's 100%, it's just going to cut too much. And it doesn't sound like there's a reverb at all. But if we go along with the automated version here, you can still hear that reverb coming in. And then the final thing is that we have volume automation. So we have the sound starting quieter. It starts to go up as the reverb gets automated. And then we have some side chaining dips here, which is just a creative kind of thing that it sounded like it was cool and in the mix. And then that just repeats. So this is what it sounds like with those automations on top. So let's listen to what it sounds like without any of these automations and then with them thrown on top and see how much of a difference it makes. So now, with those automations on top, this is what it sounds like. So it's quite a subtle difference for this layer in particular, but all of these little differences add up to make a track sound like it's breathing and living a bit more, and it just sounds a bit more creative. There are no rules when it comes to automating things inside your synths or like your effects, whatever. It's all down to whatever works and whatever you like. And sometimes you'll come across an automation that you'll do and it'll actually sound really cool, and you can kind of develop that into your sort of signature sound, whether that be like a reverb automation style or, some kind of filter automation, and that can really help you kind of sound more unique. So I hope that's given you a brief overview of how to automate things and make macros inside of PhasePlant and what kind of cool things you can do in your track to automate them and to make them sound a bit more exciting. Huge thanks to Kilohearts and to Subpack for sponsoring these videos, and you can use my code Protostar on both of their sites for 15% off of a Subpack and 10% off any Kilohearts subscription or any product. Just make sure to use the links below, especially for Kilohearts. But yeah, I hope you guys have found these tutorials useful. I actually also do private tutoring, so if you want to email me using the email below and inquire about my rates and availability, then we can book some one-on-one sessions where I can teach music production and other things related to industry, etc. as well. So thanks for watching, and bye.